now. Okay, we're just all getting settled. We're going to have a really big group today. So welcome. I am Jamie Jeanette. I'm with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services, and we help oversee the homeless system of care. And every month we offer trainings for homeless service providers and sort of adjacent. And we're going to ask folks to stay muted. Actually, I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides that will help go through just a little bit of housekeeping and intros. And Shelby and Mary, if you guys could just keep letting people in and muting them if need be, that'd be great. Okay, let me pull up my slide deck. 1 second. Always something. All right. And I don't know why. Show my window. There we go. Okay. So you all hopefully know what you're here for, which is we're doing a training, and this is the first one we've done through our homeless continuum of care about serving undocumented clients experiencing homelessness. And part of why we're doing this training is we've gotten lots of questions over the last year or two and thought that we would pull together a couple of speakers. At the end, there's going to be a little survey for you to give us feedback. And we definitely want to get it on this one because we haven't done this before. So we want to make sure we're capturing the questions that you all have. Oops. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So the speakers will tell you how they prefer to do questions. You're welcome to put them in the chat. There's also going to be opportunities for you to raise your virtual hand or come off video and furiously wave, and we'll try and capture your questions that way. And we are asking people to stay muted unless you're being asked to unmute. Otherwise, it just gets a little chaotic. Just some training norms and agreements. So we're asking you to respect the trainers, respect the attendees, make space and take space and share the mic. This is really and acknowledging power and privilege. This is just about making sure that if you're a person who often is asks a lot of questions, I'm that person. Just remember to hang back a little bit sometimes and make space for other people. If you tend to be quieter, we encourage you to push yourself and step forward and ask some questions or engage. A little bit about our training. So we offer these trainings monthly. They are we help coordinate them. And they are, for the most part, these are required for direct service staff and program managers. This is a training that is not explicitly required. Most of our trainings are, but we are really happy to see so many people here because we think this is really important information. Some of these trainings are required under HUD, and others we've decided are really important for providers to have. And actually for this one, HUD doesn't require anything about how to serve undocumented clients, but we think it's really part of our written standards around cultural competence and really understanding the challenges and the best ways to work with folks from different communities. Just in terms of Shelby, I don't know if you want to say anything about this. This is a little different because it's not required, but in general.
So just want to flag that all of our CoC trainings are required for our providers each month. So you are required to send a staff. There are trainings that we as a CoC are not required to provide. And yes, this is one of them. It's an optional training for us to provide, but just want to be totally clear. This is still required for you all to attend if you're a homeless service provider. We're monitoring attendance like always, and whenever we meet quarterly, I will be checking to make sure that you had someone attend. We know smaller agencies might be more challenging. So if anything does come up, feel free to flag for me. And you can always take the training after, like if you were sick or out for vacation, we do post them. So if you need the materials, they get sent out and you can take it later. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelby. The other piece that we've implemented this year is really trying to figure out how to thread equity into all of our trainings, and it's especially relevant for this one. But just some questions for you all to hold as you're going through these trainings, in this training in particular. So have you noticed any inequities or sort of uneven experiences of different groups of people in your own work on this topic? Have you contributed to or interrupted inequities? And then thinking about what barriers still exist and how they might be addressed. And I want to just share a little bit of data as we walk into this training. So I have the citation at the bottom, but this is data about Contra Costa County, about how many, there was a report done, and estimated that about 48,600 undocumented immigrants lived in Contra Costa in 2019. And then you can see the most common countries that people are coming from. So Mexico is number one by a vast margin. El Salvador is number two, India and China. And I thought I had more data, but I think that's all I got. But if you're interested, there's a ton of information on that report. So just wanted to frame kind of big picture the population that we're talking about. And with that, I want to introduce our trainers. So we have Jessica Jenkins, who is from Bay Area Legal Aid, Dorina Moraida Salgado, who's the program director and co-founder of Hijas del Campo, Gina Bills and Rosie Reed from Contra Costa Office of Ed. And then we have Mary and Shelby from our team from H3 that are going to talk about some housing related stuff. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let Jessica share. And Jessica, just remind them how you would like to take questions, and then I'll also watch in the chat.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get my slides up here. I am open to questions. I know sometimes you might just have a clarifying question that would make more sense to address in the moment rather than wait till the end. So you can put them in the chat. If it's something that seems like will be better addressed at the end of my presentation, I can say that. I think if there are a lot of questions, because we have a big group, I might just suggest holding off, but feel free to put them in the chat and we'll see. We'll start by addressing them as we go. I think will make the most sense. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Jenkins, and I manage the immigration program at Bay Area Legal Aid. We are, some of you may have worked with us before. I manage our immigration program specifically, which is one of our regional programs. We operate all over the Bay Area, including Contra Costa County. And we are the largest provider of free civil legal services to low-income people living in the Bay Area. So civil legal services pretty much means everything you can think of that's not criminal. So we don't do criminal defense. That's what the public defender is for. And then low income means we are serving people at or below poverty level primarily. So if you do eligibility screening for the programs you work for, you know how low that federal poverty limit is, right? We can sometimes make exceptions, but that's who we are primarily mandated to serve. We get federal funding, so we fall under some specific guidelines from the Federal Legal Services Corporation. But we have 6 offices in our Contra Costa office is in Richmond. We have an office in Oakland, an office in San Jose, which is where I am right now. An office in Redwood City, an office in San Francisco, and an office in Napa. And what do we do? So we work on a lot of different issue areas. Economic justice is our access to public benefits work. I will be speaking a little bit about public benefits today, but I'm not an expert in that field. So if you have clients who have issues accessing benefits, like they've applied and they've been denied, and you think that they should probably be approved, we can be a helpful resource for that. Similarly, we have healthcare access through our Health Consumer Center, which is a hotline operated every day of the week, Monday through Friday, to help people access healthcare benefits. We do housing, we do access to fair housing, so working on issues of housing discrimination for people in subsidized housing, and then also eviction defense. Family law and immigration for survivors. So these 2 practice areas are really intertwined at Bay Legal. My family law colleagues help people with issues like restraining orders. We have a restraining order clinic in our Contra Costa office in Richmond. And we also are sometimes able to help represent people in divorce and child custody if they are survivors of domestic violence. I'll speak more about our immigration work in a second. We have a consumer rights project for people with issues around debt and debt collection, and then also our youth justice work. works with young people who are teenagers and transitional aged youth in a lot of these issue areas as well as others. So our immigration work is specifically for people who are survivors of domestic violence, of human trafficking, and sexual assault, and often overlaps with our family law work, but also overlaps a lot with the rest of the practice areas mentioned here. Our immigration program is really small at Bay Legal. So I manage our immigration program. We currently have one other full-time staff attorney dedicated to immigration. A lot of my colleagues and other practice areas also are able to provide some immigration representation for their clients. We try really hard at Bay Legal to provide holistic services. So if someone comes in with more than one legal issue, we do our best to address as many of their issues as we have capacity for. But that being said, our immigration program is small. So I will be providing referrals at the end of my presentation for other service providers in the county as well, knowing that we cannot take everybody, unfortunately. Okay, so what will I be talking about today? One thing I wanted to spend a little time talking about is how people can access the immigration system, how people can obtain legal status if they are eligible for it. And this is just going to be a really basic, broad overview because, you know, we only have so much time today. I will spend some time talking specifically about immigration relief available for people who are survivors. This is what our practice at Bay Area Legal Aid specifically focuses on. So these are the types of cases we do. Also knowing that folks who are unhoused are really vulnerable to exploitation and being victims of crime, right? So the communities that you all are working with might disproportionately be victimized. And if their immigration status is at issue, I think this is really a helpful issue for you all to know about. I'll spend a little time talking about some concerns that I know are really prevalent around receiving public assistance for people who are undocumented or are working on getting legal status. And then finally, I'll share some other resources in Contra Costa County specifically, but also Bay Area wide for people who need further assistance. All right. Any questions so far? I'm guessing no yet. Okay, so one thing I want to spend a little time talking about is how do people get legal status? Some of you very well may have interacted with the U.S. immigration system yourself, or maybe you've helped a family member, or maybe you are currently in the middle of interacting with the immigration system. And some of you may never have had a reason to, right? I think those of us who are born in this country, I was born in this country, unless you work in this field or are close to somebody who you care about who is interacting with it, you may never have had a reason to, right? There are a lot of misconceptions around immigration status and the immigration system. So I'm really excited that so many of you came to this presentation so that I can help sort of scratch the surface, dispelling some of those misconceptions. So one really common thing I hear, you know, just from people in general in the world, my own friends and family, they'll be talking about an individual they might know, and they'll say, gosh, you know, she's been here for 20 years. Why isn't she a citizen yet? And the implication sometimes is she just didn't get around to filling out that paperwork. Unfortunately, in most cases, the reality is a lot more complicated than that. So there are a lot of folks who are undocumented who may not have any path currently to any kind of legal status. There are folks who are undocumented who may be eligible for some type of immigration status, but don't yet realize it, right? Which is like where people like me and my colleagues come in. And there might be people who know that they qualify for something and are in the process of trying to get it, but it's just taking a really long time. Or they're having trouble accessing the right legal help. So just in general, really broad overview, to become a US citizen, you first need a green card. So, and there isn't really, in most cases at least, there isn't really a way just to sort of leapfrog straight to US citizenship from being undocumented. Most folks are going to need to first have a green card, officially known as a lawful permanent residence. But it's a little card, like a driver's license, literally is green now. And there's multiple ways to get there. So one way that I think is the way that a lot of people hear about commonly is through a family member. So if you're married to a US citizen, if you have adult children who are US citizens, or maybe parents who are US citizens, those relatives can file a petition and get you on your way to your own green card. There are a lot of pitfalls in this process. So even if someone has a US citizen spouse, for example, they might not actually qualify to get a green card. There's a lot of penalties baked into the immigration system. So people who are already here undocumented, there might be something about their immigration history or other things about their situation or their past that actually make them ineligible. But some folks can get legal status through relatives who have status. Another broad category to think about is all the kind of humanitarian immigration relief that exists there. So people who are seeking protection, right, because they are afraid of being harmed or persecuted in their home country. This is something we've been hearing about a lot in the news, right? And an issue that some of you may be seeing directly with the folks you're working with, right? Because there's a lot of recent arrivals all over the country right now, including the Bay Area, who are seeking something called asylum. So they're afraid to go back to the country they're from. They've come to the US and they're asking for our protection. There are other types of humanitarian relief that we'll talk about in a little more detail. People who are victims of crime or victims of domestic violence or victims of human trafficking might also qualify for humanitarian relief. There are also certain people who've come to the US from countries where there is conflict, most recently Afghanistan and Ukraine, who've been given a special permission to enter the country. And for a lot of these folks, that protection that they are asking for might also be a path eventually towards a green card. Also, there are people who are trying to get legal status through work, through an employer. You might see some of those folks through the shelter system who might be unhoused. Maybe they came that way, but they've lost a job. Maybe they were brought by a family member on a work-based petition, but they have since split up with that person. Maybe there's abuse in the relationship. Generally speaking, when we're talking about employment-based status, we're talking about people in more higher paid professions. So it might be a little less common to be able to see that. And then another big category is people who are in deportation proceedings. So this might sound like a little bit of a contradiction, but sometimes the government is actively trying to deport somebody, so they have to go to what's called immigration court. There's one in San Francisco and there's a new one in Concord. So y'all might be seeing more people in the county who have court dates in Concord. But if you are in the process of having to defend yourself against being deported in immigration court, some of the ways people can defend themselves against deportation can also get them legal status and ultimately a green card. So these are just some examples of the kind of broad categories of how people might get to legal status. This leaves out lots of people. What if you are undocumented and don't have any family members who have status, right? What if you don't really have a good case to say that you're afraid to go back to your home country, right? What if you're just here trying to work and support yourselves? There's a lot of folks in that situation who don't have any path to legal status, unfortunately. We haven't had an overhaul of our immigration law since 1986. I was a toddler the last time we had an overhaul of our immigration law. So that means, unfortunately, that there are millions of people in the United States who might not qualify for anything, right? So I think just all of this is to say, you're working with people who are undocumented. The fact that they're undocumented, there may not be anything that they can do to fix that, right? But we don't want to assume that without first guiding them towards, a licensed attorney or immigration legal service provider who can screen them and see if that really is the case or if there's something about their situation that might be different. Another thing I'll say is a lot of the application types, and I'm talking about right now, might come with something called a work permit. So a work permit is what gives people, what it sounds like, the permission to legally work in the United States. It entitles them to a social security number. A work permit might be evidence that somebody actually has legal status, that they're on their way to a green card. It might also just be evidence that they have an application pending. And it might not even mean, it might not actually mean that they are allowed to be here permanently. It just might just mean like while the government's reviewing their case, they're allowed to work and support themselves. A lot of people who are applying for asylum, who have a deportation case pending, might have a work permit while that application is being reviewed by the government. A lot of the application types I'm talking about take years to process, like years. So there's a lot of folks who are kind of in a legal limbo while they're waiting. And hopefully, if they're lucky, they're waiting for a benefit to be reviewed that entitles them to a work permit while they're waiting.
Jessica, just a heads up, you have about 10 minutes left.
All right. I will speed up. Okay. So I wanted to just share briefly, these are some of the application types most commonly that we see for people specifically who are survivors. So if somebody is a survivor of domestic violence and they are undocumented, I always have two questions. First one is, were you married to the person who abused you? And my second question is, was that person a US citizen or a green card holder? And if the answers to those things are both yes, then that person might be entitled to their own path towards a green card through something called VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which allows them to apply for their own green card without involving the abusive partner. So if someone's undocumented and a domestic violence survivor, they should definitely talk to an attorney. A U visa is for victims of serious crime. There's a whole long list of crimes that can qualify somebody for a U visa. We have a whole separate presentation about all of these things that I can give to one of your organizations if you're interested in learning more. But unfortunately, we know that people who are low income, who are unhoused, who are undocumented are especially vulnerable to being exploited and victimized, right? So in your work, you might be running into people who are survivors of crime. It's really important to know that they should be reporting the crime to the police and they should be talking to the police in that investigation, because that is what will help them on the path towards getting a U visa. A T visa is for survivors of human trafficking. This includes sex trafficking. It also includes labor trafficking. So if you are running across people who seem to have an especially sketchy sounding work situation going on, they should talk to an attorney. Like they're working but not getting paid, like their boss is hanging on to their passport, like they don't feel safe leaving their work environment, they should definitely talk to an attorney. Asylum, like I said, is for people who are fleeing persecution in their country of origin. And special immigrant juvenile status is what it sounds like. It's a special status for abused, abandoned, and neglected immigrant youth. I'm not expecting you all to like become experts and screen people for these forms of relief, but I wanted to put this out there just so it rings a little bell in your head when you run across somebody who might be in one or more of these situations. Hey, they should talk to an immigration attorney. This could be, there might be protection available for them. Everybody's situation is different. There can be like one little detail that distinguishes two people who are seemingly in the same situation. So everybody should be getting regular screenings from an immigration attorney to see if something about their own situation has changed or if something about the law has changed, to put them on the path towards legal status. Okay, public charge, switching gears briefly, this is the concern that receiving public benefits will make somebody, put somebody at risk of deportation or make them ineligible for legal status. The really basic important things to know is that it does not apply to all immigrants, that only certain benefits actually pose a public charge problem, and that receiving benefits is just like one little piece of everything the government is going to consider when determining if somebody qualifies for immigration relief. So who does it apply to? It does not apply to people who already have green cards and are applying for citizenship. It does not apply to almost all humanitarian immigrants. So all of those categories I just told you about a few minutes ago, people applying for illegal status based on being a survivor, based on fear of persecution, it does not apply to them. So the people who it actually applies to are quite limited. And it doesn't really apply to people who are undocumented and don't have any path towards legal status. Like no one is going to like come after them specifically and hold it against them if they're applying for public assistance that they qualify for, if they're not even in contact with the immigration system. What benefits will be a public charge problem? The really important takeaway here, and there's a lot of information on this slide, you can look at it when you get the slide sent to you. The people for whom public charge is a problem and the people who are eligible for benefits that can actually be a public charge problem are not the same people in almost all cases. So if you qualify for public benefits that can be a public charge problem, you probably already have immigration legal status and don't need to worry about it. If you are getting Medi-Cal in the state of California, which is available for everybody who's undocumented now, great, which is great, it's not going to be a public charge problem for you. So really, this is not something most folks should be worrying about. Any kind of assistance that is for food or medical assistance, not a public charge problem. Really, the only things we worry about are people who are living purely on cash from the government. And again, if you actually qualify to get cash assistance from the government, you probably don't need to even worry about public charge because you probably already have legal immigration status. And then just to reinforce this, here are some programs that are available to everybody in California, regardless of their legal status. Most excitingly, Medi-Cal for everybody now. Anything that they're receiving on behalf of their US citizen children is not a problem. Their status doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Women WIC benefits, any kind of food assistance. Again, these are all programs that people can qualify for, whether or not they even have legal status, and also will not pose a problem for their own immigration status. Where can people get help? So this is a list of legal service providers in Contra Costa County, including us. But like I said, our immigration program is small and we are limited in scope in terms of what we can do. So there's some other really great referrals here that are specific to Contra Costa County. There's a nationwide directory I've linked to here where you can look up immigration legal service providers by zip code. And then if you are encountering somebody who has a court date, who needs to go to immigration court, there is a specific list that the government puts out of immigration legal service providers who do deportation defense. And it's filtered by state and location. So you can look at that as well for Bay Area referrals. And then you hopefully already know about this, but Stand Together Contra Costa has a hotline that people can call if they see or suspect ICE presence in the community and are concerned about it. Or if they are in deportation proceedings and need assistance. And then to refer to us for all of the types of legal services I mentioned earlier, these are the main way that we receive referrals is through our hotlines. So we have a legal advice line, we have a dedicated line for people who are survivors, and then we also have a dedicated line for our Health Consumer Center for people who need help accessing healthcare benefits. And this is my contact information. Like I said, this is the best way to send referrals to us is through our hotlines. But if you want to make a warm referral or have other questions, you're welcome to email.
Jessica, that was awesome. I have a couple polls I'm going to do with people, but there's also a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it or if you'd like me to read it from Raquel.
I can see it actually.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. The question, many undocumented waiting on an immigration case are told by their immigrant lawyer not to apply for CalFresh because it can affect them. Oh, did you want me to read the question? Or are you doing the poll?
I'm sorry. I'm doing the poll while you're reading the question, which was probably rude.
Oh, that's okay. Is there any document we can provide to them that is not a public charge and is not going to affect their immigration path? Yeah, you know, this is a really, I'm glad you asked this. The level of education in, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I was still sharing the screen. I'm going to stop sharing. The level of information in the immigrant legal service provider community around public charge sometimes varies. People can definitely call our legal advice line if they have questions about accessing public benefits and their eligibility. But there is also a really great website that I'm going to put in the chat called keepyourbenefits.org. And people can specifically look at the California version. And it is a tool that people can use to sort of assess their own situation to see if a public benefit is or isn't going to be a problem for them. So I would encourage people to use that website and to share it with their attorneys. And also they're welcome to contact us at Bay Area Legal Aid. Like the attorneys can contact us too if they have questions about, I think a lot of attorneys might just be kind of overly cautious in the advice they're giving people, but CalFresh really shouldn't be a problem and people should be able to feed themselves and their families.
Thank you, Jessica. So I'm loving the answers to these. So this question is, undocumented immigrants may be eligible for the following programs. The options are Medi-Cal, WIC, shelters, regional center, all of the above, or none of the above. So I'm seeing the answers roll in. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to end the poll, but the answer is actually all of the above. So for those of you that got it, yay. For those of you that didn't, you learned something. So folks that are undocumented are eligible for all of these things. So that's especially important to know about our shelters and the regional centers. So if you have families with children with disabilities, make sure they're getting connected there. Jessica, thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop the polls and we're going to go to Dorina. Oh, so are undocumented individuals eligible for homeless court? That is a very interesting question. I am not sure. We can find out. Do you know, Jessica, offhand? So we have a homeless court that is for basically infractions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see. Yeah, I don't see why not. But
it's kind of like mental health court to like defer people.
It's actually basically like they get their they are, if they can document that they're engaged in some kind of program to kind of move their lives forward, then they can have the fines and fees wiped away. So it's not for misdemeanors, it's basically infractions.
Yeah, this is ringing a bell now. I don't see why their legal status should make any difference. Generally speaking, when you're working with the local court system in California, immigration status is not an issue. Immigration is controlled and run by the federal government. And we have also, I forgot to say this earlier, but we have really good sanctuary protections in California. Local and state government officials are not supposed to be proactively sharing individuals' information with ICE. There are very limited exceptions to that depend on people who have serious criminal convictions. But in general, the local courts, the local government agencies, including agencies some of you might work for, are not to be sharing people's info with ICE. So yeah, generally speaking, should be fine.
Great, thank you. Yes, and as Mary said, our
actually,
team... Go ahead.
So H3, we work with the Contra Costa County Court to run the homeless court program, and we do not look at immigration status when looking at referrals or anything like that. So yes, folks who are undocumented are eligible for homeless court, or immigration status is not a factor in determining eligibility for homeless court.
I see more questions in the chat. I want to move on to our next speaker, but we may be able to get you some answers in the chat as well, or you might be able to get your answers soon. So I'm going to turn things over to Dorina.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Jessica. That was really informative. I myself learned a lot, so thank you for that. I'm going to share more about our organization and just our experience in working with undocumented individuals. We are Hijas del Campo, and we are an official 501c3 nonprofit based here in Far East Contra Costa, but we also have a focus in San Joaquin County. The next slide. And our mission is to help migrant and seasonal farm workers and their families improve their daily lives. And our vision is a community where all campesinos are thriving. And the next slide. Okay, our client demographics are mainly farm workers and their family. About 72% of the families we serve have children, and almost 100% of our clients are monolingual, Spanish speaking only. And most of our clients are first or second generation immigrants, mainly from Mexico, with a small growing group of people growing from Guatemala and also other South American countries, and the majority of our clients are undocumented. Okay, here are issues that we see in our community with the community we serve is income insecurity. Most of their work is based on seasons. So they go through high seasons where they're working consistently, and then they have low seasons depending on, you know, the way the crops are. So they could go months without work. And because they are undocumented, most of them are not eligible to receive any public benefit as far as like unemployment during this time. We have food insecurity. Ironically, the people picking our food are the ones that have a hard time securing food for their own tables. And then, you know, language barriers, which is a big issue to accessing resources and services for them. Not only language, but also like technology barriers and transportation barriers and all of these things. Education barriers as well. We focus a lot on building up our youth program and our education program to really empower the youth to pursue like a higher education or a different type of trade after high school to really get them out of this poverty cycle and hopefully away from, you know, continuing the cycle of working in the farms, unless they want to, of course. But as we all know, it's a very low paying job. And so we really want them to know that there is other resources out there for them and other opportunities outside of the farms. So we have an education program. And then another thing is, you know, legal insecurities, like Jessica talked about just now. We face the same issues. There hasn't been any type of you know, overlook of the immigration system since 1986, which was the Immigration and Reform Act. Since then, there really hasn't been anything. There's no real pathway for farm workers. Jessica also talked about like different immigration pathways to apply to adjust your status or apply for a green card. Unfortunately, for a lot of our farm workers that are undocumented, there's no legal pathway for them. And then the next slide. So we talked about already the salary insecurity, and now housing insecurity. Most of our clients are housing insecure. And so here at HCC, we focus a lot on eviction prevention. We really try to support families who are having a hard time, you know, paying their rent this month. And a lot of times it's a one-time bill assistance or rental assistance where we're able to help them this 1 month to get on track. And then hopefully by the following month, they're able to have work and pay for their next month's rent. We found this to be really efficient. So we don't wait for someone to get an eviction notice in order for us to help them. We try to really help them like with prevention to get, you know, to prevent getting to that point. We've seen a really successful rate as far as that goes. A lot of times people just need that one-time help so that they don't fall deep into that hole. And so they've been able to, I mean, I think about 98, 99% of the families we've helped with bill or rental assistance has been a one-time help, and they haven't came back to ask for a second-time help. So that has showed us that a lot of people just need that one-time assistance to stay on track. So we do that. We also have a free mobile clinic that comes out to our office once a week, and this is open to all community members who are experiencing some type of housing insecurity. And it's a free mobile clinic, and this has been really successful for us to be able to have this available to our clients, but also to other community members to have a free clinic once a week. And during that time, we also have a specialist that comes in to help assist people with medical, applying for Medi-Cal. Like we talked about, a lot of times people do not know how to access these systems or do not understand how to complete an application or how it works. So we have a specialist on site to assist for applying for Medi-Cal. And that is also open to the community. So if you have any clients or know anybody who needs assistance with that, you could send them our way. We are happy to help with that. I think we talked about that. Yeah. And here's a picture just of our farm workers. So we were asked to, kind of discuss how it is that we should focus how to lead when we're working with people who are undocumented. And our approach has always been to lead with compassion. Most of our immigrants or just our clients have some type of trauma-enforced background, making it really difficult for them to seek assistance, and really having that awareness and that understanding that people have trauma. And a lot of times when people come in, they're either scared or they're just naturally upset or angry. It's nothing to do with us. It's really to do with them. So for us to really understand how to how to take a step back and really have that compassion and really see that it's just something that's triggering their own traumas. And then many of them are here alone. They don't have anybody here, or they don't speak the language. And it's important for us to recognize that our communities have been, excluded and discriminated against. And so these are real fears and mistrust that exist within the community. So it's really important for us to have that understanding and that awareness. And then for many of our clients, we are the first contact of hope. They haven't had much success accessing resources or even somebody who is able to help them. So we really focus on being mindful of that. And when, we could talk to many people, right? But for them, it's you're that one person that they're confiding in to talk to seek assistance for. And it could really be life-changing for them, that interaction that you have when you're, talking to them. Also, we focus a lot on doing warm handoffs, because when you do a referral, a lot of times, you give somebody a website or you give somebody a phone number, and for them to build up the courage to actually pick up the phone and call and share their story with another person, another stranger, is really difficult. So we really try to do warm handoff. So if we're referring them to somebody, we try to be that middle person for them to reach out to that other organization and, make sure that they are being trusted, that they know that person's going to call, and then letting them know, so-and-so from such and such place will be calling you. Please pick up the phone. So that's also been successful for us. It's hard to, like I said, just give somebody a phone number. Sometimes they won't, most of the time they won't call because they're afraid or don't have that trust. So I think that was the next slide. Yeah. These are some recommended resources. Most of them are documentaries or movies or books that we like to refer as a resource to really understand the issues that undocumented and also farm workers face. So we just put these here for you guys to take a look if you like. And
so we have a couple, there was a question in the chat about eviction prevention, and if it was only for farm workers or for anyone that's undocumented.
Yes, our focus is farm workers. So most of our funding is directly for farm workers. So it is specific to farm workers.
But we do have prevention services more broadly in our system of care, right? So if you're calling 211 and they have Spanish speakers that can help people with eviction prevention. And also, I'm going to do a few more polls here. But also if folks have other questions, we can do that. So first question, it's a true or false. All natives of Mexico speak Spanish. True or false? Oh, I'm seeing lots of correct answers. So one question in the chat, can we get a good contact person from Hijas del Campo or HIV? Something has been trying to contact the organization since 2021 unsuccessfully. Team. HIV team. I think you have the good contact person. Donina, are you able to share your contact information?
Yes, I'm putting
Perfect.
that in the chat now.
Okay, so I just want to note on the poll, the statement was all natives of Mexico speak Spanish. And we actually know that that's false. And Doreen, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about that, but one thing I've heard sort of anecdotally is we have lots of folks coming that maybe only speak indigenous languages and don't really actually speak even Spanish, let alone English.
That's correct. Yes.
So that can be a challenge, and that's where you would probably want to use a 211 translator. Translation line, and 211 can often help you with that. And I don't know if you have any other comments about sort of translation ideas, if that comes up. So the second poll, statement, true or false? Undocumented community members do not pay taxes. True or false? Okay, the answers are still rolling in. Okay, answers are still rolling in. They're slowing down, so I'm going to share them. So what we know, and so Donina or Jessica, I don't know if you have anything that you want to say on this relating to taxes, but I was looking through some of your slides, Donina, and in your commentary, that people are paying taxes. They're not getting Social Security, but they are paying taxes for the most part. I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that.
Yes, that is correct. Some of them have ITIN numbers, so an tax identification number, and they are, well, everybody's getting taxed on their paychecks. So everybody who gets a paycheck does get tax withheld.
Yep. And I will add that the IRS is fully unconcerned about people's legal status, is happy to get their taxes, does not report people's taxes. And that if people do eventually become eligible for legal status, having a tax return can be a very helpful way to demonstrate good moral character and physical presence and all that.
The last poll question for this section, if someone rents a room from someone, they are not considered housing insecure. True or false? And I think the context for this also, Dorina, I don't know if you want to say anything more about this, but it sounds like this is a really common situation for a lot of your clients or the folks that you're working with.
Yes, so as I mentioned, the majority of our clients are housing insecure. And that means that they're either like renting a room from someone, renting a couch, but their name is like not on the lease. They don't have their own place. So they're just, a bad conversation away or like a bad experience away from being kicked out of where they're living. We do have a lot of clients that are unhoused, that sleep in their cars, that, are here for like a short season. So the majority of our clients are housing insecure because like I said, it's not their home, they're not on the lease. So there's no security there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to move to the next section. We're going to have some more time at the end for broader questions, but I want to make sure we get through the Office of Education and their section. So let me get the slide deck up. One moment. Oops, next slide. Okay, so Gina, you guys can just tell me when you're ready for me to advance.
Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gina Bills. I'm the Education Liaison here at the County Office of Education, supporting homeless education programs for our unhoused children and youth and families. And I will pass it over to Rosie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosie Reed, and I am the Foster Youth and McKinney-Vento Liaison for Mount Diablo Unified School District. McKinney-Vento is the federal law that protects families and students experiencing homelessness. So we are going to be... Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rose. Sorry.
So we're going to be sharing some information with you today about how we can help our families and our students access school, and going over a few key sets of rights and talking a little bit about barriers. And it's really important, I think, for all of us to understand what rights students do have in terms of enrolling in school, accessing school, resources that are available, because so often our families don't enroll their students because they don't realize the protections that are in place. So because of that, we have a lot of students who are undocumented. Sometimes those students may be unaccompanied youth who are living here. Sometimes they might be living with their families. But in either case, there can be some serious causes of school disruption. So they might have had limited access to education. In most Central American countries, students do not have the right to go to school after grade 6. They have to pay for it. In a lot of parts of Mexico and more rural communities, they don't have the right to go to school for free after grade 2. So that might lead to several years of interrupted schooling, and that can make it hard for students to come back to school, and just that in and of itself. But then often when families arrive, they're worried about their legal status being detected upon enrollment, or deportation, those kinds of things. So we really want to make sure that everybody understands the significant barriers and the mistrust that can happen when families are thinking about enrolling their students. Next slide, please. Okay. So some of the barriers to education might be about testing, graduating, absences because they've had such interrupted schooling at times. Often we have language issues like we were just talking about in the last presentation. I did put a link into the chat about working with families who speak Indigenous languages. Most of the families that we have in Central Contra Costa County, I'm not sure about other parts of Contra Costa County, but they speak Quiche. And but there's also mum. I think it's pronounced mum, but it's written ma'am. But those are the two most common languages, but mostly Quiche. Most schools work with a language line, and they can call. It's quite easy actually to get Quiche. Mum's a little harder, but that organization that I just referred you to can help with that piece too. So when we're working with our families, we want to make sure they understand that they do have a right to graduation protections. They can get partial credits if they enter the school system. If they're in high school and they haven't completed a whole semester, we can give them partial credit for the amount of time that they were enrolled in schools. They can also have potentially can have what's called a graduation exemption or a credit exemption, meaning they can graduate at the state minimum requirement of 130 credits, which can be really, really helpful for our students who may be entering the country or working and coming into our schools, and they've only maybe haven't had any high school at all, and they're 17, 18 years old. So then they can just do 130 credits instead of 220 credits. And that makes graduation a lot more feasible for them. One thing that is really important, and we will talk about this briefly, is the idea of an educational rights holder. That can be, it's typically a parent or a guardian that the courts have given that right to, but a lot of our students don't live with their educational rights holder. It can be hard to find them. Maybe they are unaccompanied. And so every school district has the right to appoint an educational rights holder for that student. And the person the student is living with can be a temporary educational rights holder for them until we are able to appoint one. So those are all things that could really help the students in terms of accessing the supports that they need. In terms of student barriers, often, like I said, we've had interrupted schooling, so there could be low levels of language and literacy. Not speaking English or Spanish is fairly common. Potentially a lack of support at home. Often our students do have to work outside of school to help support their families. And then again, the lack of knowledge about their laws, rights, and services, which is where you all come in. Kind of went over this just now, but this idea that we do have to have legal requirements to, mostly this is a special ed thing, and also for getting those graduation exemptions. We do not need an educational rights holder to enroll in school. A student can enroll in school by themselves. A student can, a person, I've had people bring a neighbor, bring a kid in and enroll that student. And unlike if I were going to enroll my student, my own child in school, we do not need to have a birth certificate. We do not need to have all of the documentation that is typically necessary. We can enroll the student that day with whatever they have with them. And that's a key piece. So this educational rights holder conversation is really separate. That's more for specialized supports and things like that. But in terms of enrollment, we don't need that. So giving you all a scenario, this is not an uncommon scenario. So I'm going to ask you to put some ideas into the chat. What do you think are some potential barriers that this student might face in terms of their education? So Jason is a 16-year-old from Guatemala who was released to his uncle upon crossing the border. Typically, our unaccompanied youth come across the border and they're taken into custody and they're released to a sponsor. So Jason is currently working to pay rent and to send money back to his family in his country of origin. Jason left school when he was 10 years old and has been working ever since. Jason speaks Quiche, an indigenous language, and it has very limited proficiency in English and Spanish. So what do you think are some potential barriers for school enrollment or success in school once he is enrolled?
Folks, you can also do your little virtual hand raise if you can't.
Working, yes, absolutely. Some of our students work 40 hours a week in addition to going to school. Transportation, and the school districts will provide transportation for these students. So that's an important thing to reach out to the person, whoever is doing my role in the school district. We can help make sure those students can get to and from school. Sometimes that's by providing bus passes. Sometimes we get the students a bike and a helmet and a bike lock. What else might be another barrier for the student? The language, exactly, right. Yeah, so again, speaking Quiche and not speaking Spanish or English is a common phenomenon. So our schools are working to help these students to make sure that they can access their classes and their education at the most basic levels. When it comes to the enrollment center, like I said, they do have access to a translation line that can help facilitate all of those processes. And we're working on making sure that we are able to get students successful in school, regardless of where they come in terms of a complete newcomer with no English and no Spanish. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide.
Okay, so the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, that is a federal law that was passed way back in 1987. It's been revised and revamped a few times over the years, but the guiding definition of the McKinney-Vento Act is children, families, and youth that are lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So in a nutshell, can the student go to the same place, which is fixed, every night, which would be regular, and can they sleep in a safe and sufficient space? Is it adequate? But then the McKinney-Vento Act goes on to provide a little bit more context and also include those that are sharing housing. So most of you might come into contact with our families that are doubled up. But under the McKinney-Vento Act, is that housing due to loss of employment, a job, economic hardship, or a similar reason? So some nationwide data, a few years ago, 77% of folks that were identified as McKinney-Vento students were sharing housing for one of those reasons. Under the McKinney-Vento Act, that also includes our folks that are living in hotels, motels, vehicles, abandoned buildings, campgrounds, any area that is not fit for human habitation. When we surveyed nationwide data, 8% of McKinney-Vento identified students were at 8%. Next slide, please. Some of our families and youth are also living in emergency or transitional shelters. That accounts nationwide for about 11%. Any public or private spaces not designed for regularly used accommodations. I've come across families that are sleeping in a park, but then when it gets cold, they stay the night in the park bathroom. I've already gone over buildings, bus stations, things like that. That accounts for 4%. And substandard housing also falls under the McKinney-Vento Act. And substandard housing includes an house or apartment or shelter that lacks the adequate accommodations. So there may be exposed wiring or mold or termites in the home. And McKinney-Vento Act also includes our unaccompanied youth. So any youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, as well as our migrant students. Next slide, please.
So in determining eligibility for the McKinney-Vento Act, some of the questions that we will ask our families are posted here, but we will often have families who are needing financial assistance or housing assistance through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act. And so they will come to us and we will first help enroll them, but then we will do a needs assessment with the families. And typically at that point, we don't have the capacity to house anybody, right? We are a school district. But what we will do is we'll reach out to you and work with you as our community partners to work on that housing piece, work on mental health pieces, work on, potentially we needing a nurse to visit the home wherever the family is staying. And so that's where we really try to access and leverage all of our community resources. So when we find out that a family is potentially living maybe doubled up, so they're staying with another family, we always want to find out, is this due to a loss of housing, economic hardship? Is it extreme financial hardship? So there might be two families who are living together because it is, it's convenient. We can have like a child care collective and do carpooling together, and the Bay Area is expensive, but that's not necessarily extreme financial hardship. So we're talking to our families, we're typically looking for things like recent immigration or loss of a job or an eviction or maybe a bankruptcy, domestic violence, those kinds of things. So it's not just any two families living together, but it's due to these very extreme situations. So when we think a bit about there's like obviously natural disasters, earthquakes, things like that. That's less commonly the reason in our area. But then also if we talk to our family, do you have anywhere to go tomorrow? Do you have anywhere to go the next day, right? That's a key piece of looking at how stable is this housing arrangement that you have. And based on that, we would determine the level of need and connect them to those resources. We in terms of determining whether or not they're eligible, we do need to find out, some information about the family's circumstances, but we don't ask them about their documentation or their immigration status. Often families will share those things with us because it can help us put them in touch with the right resources, right? Us referring them to CalWORKs and CalFresh when they're not necessarily eligible for those things is not particularly helpful. So we do tell them that, they do not have to disclose that information, but if they do disclose that information, that can potentially help us realize, okay, we're going to have to go private church route. We're going to have to go this other route to help families get access to what they need. So this goes back to us thinking about who qualifies for the McKinney-Vento Act, cultural considerations of doubled up. We could have a family living with, a grandmother or a multi-generational living. Maybe we have two families living together, but it's not due to financial hardship. It's a nice big house. Everybody has a place to sleep. We just like living together. This is our culture. We have that communal aspect that I think one of our previous presenters was talking about. So we want to really think about that as well when we're talking to the family. If you could move out tomorrow, would you? And that really is kind of the key that we use to figure out, is this a extreme financial hardship or is this more of a cultural phenomenon that we're experiencing here? And a lot of times the families are completely happy with it. It goes on for 7-10 years and nobody is, asking for more resources. So we don't want to assume that just because two families are living together that they qualify as, legally homeless in terms of California Department of Education.
So when it comes to services and rights for students, there are quite a few under the McKinney-Vento Act. So the McKinney-Vento Act applies to our little guys, pre-K, all the way through our high schools, including our charter schools and virtual schools. So no one is exempt from the McKinney-Vento Act. There's also no age limitations. And then under the McKinney-Vento Act, as Rosie mentioned earlier, every school district is required to appoint a liaison. So students fall under the McKinney-Vento Act are entitled to immediate enrollment. That means that a student can enroll without any documentation. They don't need their birth certificate, social security card, immunization records. There should not be a lapse in enrollment if a student is missing documentation. It's also under school selection. So whether that student is able to attend their school that is closest, they're not required to go to a different school or the highest needs school. Transportation, Rosie also touched on that. Students that are eligible for transportation to their school if it isn't a barrier to education. Academic assistance, such as tutoring. Referral to community services. So if a school district, say, does not have a food pantry, the liaison would be required to provide them with services in the area where they could go to apply for CalFresh or the nearest food pantry. And then under the McKinney-Vento Act, that also includes fee waivers. So students should not be excluded for attending in any activities that may include a fee. So contacts, we all know they are required to have a liaison at every district, and the liaison is responsible for coordinating those services and making sure that the family and students receive the appropriate referrals and information. Next slide. And to find your liaison, you can hop on the COE website. That lists every liaison for all 18 school districts, including our charter schools. And if anyone on the call has trouble connecting with a liaison, you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to make that warm handoff.
I saw a question in the chat about vaccines. Yes, immunizations cannot be a barrier to enrollment in school. However, ultimately, the students are supposed to become vaccinated. I will tell you, this is the hot button issue, and most of the phone calls that the state gets regarding homeless education is about this, right? Because how long do we wait for families to get those immunizations? So right now, there is no limitation on that. The state of California is working on some clarifications for that would give specific timeframes, but right now they are allowed to attend school without proper immunizations. So in terms of, this goes into some more of the undocumented children pre-K through 12 rights. They do have the right to attend school. We cannot ask about families' immigration status, and we cannot require a social security number. We also cannot contact ICE. That's all California law. And those are important protections to know about and to reassure families about. Finally, we have here undocumented children. The students have the right to participate fully in school. So this just right there, I want you to think about what are potential barriers to full access to school. So if a student comes in, they're coming into the school, maybe it's even the middle of the semester, that student needs a backpack. They need a way to get to school. They need school supplies. They need clothing. They need shoes. The requests that I get are often, those are coming to some of the basics that I get frequently, but sometimes it's, we need glasses, we need access to medical care. So anything that could potentially be a barrier, we will provide for that student. If the student wants to play basketball, even if they missed the basketball tryouts at the beginning of the season, they have a right to have a tryout whenever they arrive. So we really want to make sure we're taking out all of the barriers for students to be fully involved in education. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide, please.
So that also applies to our little guys, our early childhood folks. So they have the right to attend preschool programs, including our Head Start and our Early Start programs. So they cannot be turned away if a student is undocumented. On the federal side, they list only qualified immigrant children. So that pertains to if the child has an LPR, legal permanent resident, or maybe they're a refugee or an asylee. However, they cannot inquire about the parent's immigration status. It is irrelevant to enrolling their child. So on the other end, higher education. So a student who's undocumented, they have the right to apply to public colleges and universities in almost every state. However, they are not eligible for federal financial aid. They are potentially eligible for the California DREAM Act, but students with legal status can apply for federal aid. Again, even if their parents are undocumented, they are not excluded. They would go through, they're still entitled to apply for the DREAM Act, FAFSA, CHAPE, anything that they feel that they're qualified to apply for. Undocumented youth are eligible for state financial aid in a few states. And then there are quite a few states that undocumented youth are eligible to apply for in-state tuition. So children and youth in transition, students experiencing homelessness. Rosie, is this your slide?
Sure.
It seems a little out of order, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. Gina and I have not presented together yet. We just work together sometimes. So yeah, this really just harkens back to what I was talking about before with, really figuring out what are the barriers. And those could be physical needs, like I said, such as backpacks, hygiene kits, blankets, clothing, warm clothing, umbrellas, water bottles, whatever they need for school. But it could also be more other kinds of resources, like making sure that the student has access to really getting people signed up for Medi-Cal. We work on that a lot, getting students access to mental health resources and really tapping into all of the services that you provide. And so, here's a slide, just to show what a lot of our students are going through. And it could be very, very scary. I recently attended a training that talked about how, especially when we're looking at our unaccompanied youth, whether they're a family or they're unaccompanied, if they are starting out at the very bottom of Mexico, the very tippy bottom of Mexico, and they walk up to the Gulf side, that is walking the equivalent of New York to Dallas, Texas, right? Now, often it's some sort of combination of walking, trains, those kinds of things, driving, but it's a whole combination. If they're going all the way over to the California side, it's the equivalent of walking, hitchhiking, taking buses, etc., from New York all the way to LA. And I think those are important things for us to think about as we're working with our families, that a lot of these students and families have experienced incredible trauma, and it's been an incredibly hard trip to get here. And then when they do, they experience even more barriers. And so find the person who does my role, call Gina if you're not sure who that person is, because our job is just to make sure that those barriers are removed for the students. And now we have time for questions.
And I also have a few polls, so I'll pop those up while we're hanging out. So the question is, the statement is, an education rights holder, this might be educational rights holder, has to be one of the child's relatives or one of the student's relatives. True or false? Answers are rolling in. And while this is happening, if there's any other questions relating to schools or education, folks will be there. Gina, or can you guys put the link to the liaisons list in the chat? Sorry, Rosie. Okay, so I'm going to share the results. So false, it does not have to be one of their relatives. Okay, let's go back to, we have one more poll. Schools may contact ICE or other law enforcement officials about students or family who may be undocumented, specifically about their immigration status. Is it launching?
Jamie, will you be sending out all of our slides to
Yeah.
the attendees? Okay.
Thank you. So I saw that question in there. So we will be forwarding out to everyone a link to the recording of this training as well as the slide deck itself. So anybody that's here and or that registered will be sending all that information out. Is this poll showing?
No.
Poll showing? Oh, okay. Let me try it again. Let me try. Oops. Relaunch the poll. Okay. Is it showing now? Okay. So the question is, schools may contact ICE or other law enforcement officials about students or families who may be undocumented, specifically around their immigration status. Okay, answers are still rolling in. All right. Answers are rolling in. I'm going to end it and share them. So the answer is false. So schools may not. And part of that is because, again, a lot of this is about making sure that there's not what we would call like a chilling effect, right? We want to make sure that families and students really understand that these places are safe places for them to access services. So that's important. So if you have families that are kind of uneasy about enrolling their kids in school, you can let them know they're not going to get reported just for being undocumented. Okay, so the last section, Shelby, would you like me to share slides for you? Okay.
Sure, that'd be great.
Hold, please. Let me get all the way down to it. All right. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. Just gonna go over a couple brief things. So you heard from Office of Ed. Thank you, Gina and Rosie. They have, a couple different definitions as far as who's eligible or who's considered homeless. So just wanted to kind of finish on our CoC programs and CoC funded programs. So as you all are aware, we have 7 different program models: prevention, diversion, rapid exit, or mobile outreach, our care centers, emergency shelters, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. If you can go into the next slide, Jamie. Thank you. So generally, as far as eligibility is concerned, it really depends on the funding source. So some of those programs, we'll talk about which ones specifically that receive federal funding. Oftentimes those require documented status or some level of documentation related to someone's immigration status. And then those state funds or other local funding is generally more flexible. So those are just kind of general eligibility as far as our programs go. If you could go to the next slide, Jamie. Jamie, are you able to go to the next slide? Hold, please.
Shelby, she said BRB.
Oh, okay. Hold, please, then. Let me see if I can pull it up on my end. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the eligibility for each of these 7 different program models is generally all of them can serve undocumented participants, especially, our access points like our core mobile outreach, our care centers, our shelters, prevention, diversion, rapid exit can definitely serve folks who are undocumented. Rapid rehousing can mostly serve undocumented participants. There may be some exceptions, again, depending on funding source, but because most of our rapid rehousing programs are funded by, state funding or local funding, we're able to provide some level of flexibility. So folks generally can be served even if they are undocumented. Do want to put the caveat that there are things that maybe a landlord might be requesting, and programs can work with the participants on what documents they might have. But for eligibility, as far as the program goes, can serve undocumented participants, generally in rapid rehousing. And then in permanent supportive housing, because most of that, if not all, is federally funded, generally can't serve undocumented participants. There are definitely exceptions. And there are exceptions as far as permanent housing, like vouchers. There are opportunities where folks may be able to be served depending on the opportunity. And there are some of our providers that do permanent supportive housing that can serve undocumented participants, but again, it's most can't. So just want to put that caveat there. And of course, Mary or CE team can chime in on those, but generally, like I said, most of our programs can serve undocumented participants. Folks may be asked about their status, so staff can help and see what things they might need help working on, if they need help getting engaged with Bay Area Legal Aid, like you heard from before, things like that. But as far as eligibility into the program, definitely won't be asked about their status or turned away for our front door services for sure. Any questions about that?
I have one quick, oh, go ahead. Valerie has a question.
Go ahead, Val.
Hi, thank you. I'm a case manager at a homeless shelter, and we are seeing elderly, undocumented clients here with multiple health issues. They are not eligible for any financial services in most housing. Are they eligible for any long-term nursing care for those who may develop Alzheimer's, dementia, and have no support system outside of our shelter?
I remember you asked me that before, Val. It's such a good question. It's just not my area of expertise, so I don't know. We could always do some research, but that I don't know. It's a great question. I would hope so. I hope the answer is yes, there are, but I'm not so sure. I can definitely go to Healthcare for the Homeless and see if they have any information on that. I'm meeting with them later today, so I'll get back with you, Val.
Can I chime in? So anyone who's undocumented and income eligible qualifies for Medi-Cal now in the state of California. I know that Medi-Cal has a lot of different programs, but my understanding is that they should qualify for full scope Medi-Cal in the same way that anybody else would. So I think that should mean that they should qualify if it is a nursing home that is paid for by Medi-Cal, though I think we should double check and get back to you but that's also the kind of thing that you could refer or help someone call our health consumer center line to find out about as well.
Thank you.
The bus didn't work on there on Wednesday.
Any other questions? And just flagging, so in terms of the poll, the correct answer was false. The question was, the statement was undocumented people may not access any housing programs on our system of care, and that's false. As Shelby said, sometimes rapid rehousing is available, occasionally some voucher programs, but also sometimes what our system of care does is help people get into other kinds of housing that may be shared housing or their own kinds of apartments. So we're at the end of our formal presentation. I did want to leave some time here for other questions. I know there was a lot of information. And in our survey, we're also going to ask, like, are there other things related to this topic that would be helpful? And the other thing I wanted to flag is that there was somebody here from Stand Together. And I realized we didn't get a chance to, oh, they have to log off, I think. But I want to just flag Stand Together is a collaboration between a couple of different agencies, including the DA's office. Yes, Jordina, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had a question for Gina or Rosie when you're done.
I'll just make a quick plug. So there's some, we will also make sure that their information, and I think is actually at the end of Jessica's slides, but there's a lot of information in there about what they can do in addition to Bay Area Legal Aid. So just want to make sure you all have that as a resource. Jordina, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Rosie or Gina, I have a client who the birth certificate for her son does not have a last name, and then she doesn't have a social security for him. What is her best approach in enrolling him in school? Because they are asking her for that information, and he'll be going into kindergarten.
Gina, you want to take that? Or
Go ahead.
Because she doesn't need it. They don't need to. They can't.
Immediate enrollment. She should
immediate
not.
enrollment.
It should not be required to enroll her student.
Per the
Okay.
McKinney-Vento Act, and California Ed Code, she can enroll without those documents. Now, I would recommend, ultimately, obviously, they're going to need to get those things
Right.
corrected.
Yes, we're working on it.
Yeah.
Right. But she's, like time is ticking on the enrollments right now. So she hasn't been able to enroll him. And so when you guys were talking about this McKinley-Vento Act, I was just thinking about her. So I'll go ahead and share this with her as well.
And you can get the liaison for whatever school district it is, if it's in Contra Costa County, and then contact that person and do that the warm handoff is so important, like you were saying. Do that warm handoff to that person who can expedite the enrollment.
Okay, this is great. Thank you so much.
Other questions that people have? Okay, I dropped a link in the chat. I'm not sure if it's working. So if somebody can like hit that link and see if it's working. It should take you to a survey about this training. I'm trying it for the first time in Zoom. Okay, great. I'm also going to send it out to people with the slide deck and the recording. But it really, really, really helps us if you give us feedback on these trainings so that we can make sure we're answering questions for you. And I'll just ask real quickly, were there other topics relating to serving undocumented clients that would be useful for when we do this training next year, or that we can get you information about between now and then?
Yes, Jamie, I think training on what Valerie was talking about on how to serve elderly and documented folks and what services are available to them, because we also have quite a bit of campesinos who are elderly and don't have, you know, any form of income if they stop working.
That's a really good point. Okay. Great.
I was just going to add that I know we touched on it a little bit, but there is a difference between undocumented and unaccompanied, and sometimes it's the same thing. But we tried not to get too far into the weeds on unaccompanied youth, especially unaccompanied immigrant youth. But that might be helpful for people to understand, because they do have different rights, and they're not formally undocumented. Like, they do have a right to be here because they have different processes. So I don't know if that's something that would be helpful to others, but they are kids living alone typically, or living with other people who are not their parents.
And I see a question in the chat. So is there housing for undocumented clients? So Shelby, I don't know if you want to touch back on kind of the pieces that you were talking about in terms of like what might be available, and maybe like a quick recap of how people can get connected to the homeless system of care.
So yeah, I'll just say super briefly, generally, yes, there are some housing resources. Again, I say generally, and there are some, but to access our homeless system of care, please reach out to one of our 3 access points. You can definitely start with 211, go walk into one of our drop-in centers, care center, or connect with mobile outreach by calling 211 and pressing 3 for core.
I'm putting links to the flyers that we have. We have one in English and one in Spanish about how to connect to those 3 access points that Shelby just mentioned. More questions coming in. So low income housing, Section 8 or under HUD funding. So Shelby, I think this is for you again.
Yeah, so I would suggest reaching out to the Housing Authority, going to their website. We don't oversee Section 8, so definitely check them out.
Great. And then there's, this is a good, there's a question. A client has stated that he does not want to be included on his family's housing application because his lawyer has stated that it may affect his case. Is this true, or can I direct them to someone in order for them to gain clarification?
Yeah, so this is about the public charge issue that I touched on really briefly. I shared some resources further up in the chat, but keepyourbenefits.org is a really good self-screening tool for people to see if a certain type of public benefit is going to impact their case. I also shared a community resource flyer from the Immigrant Legal Resource Center that I don't know if I still have the link open, but it is further up in the chat. And it is a good, helpful overview of like what I shared about what does and doesn't impact public charge. The big easy takeaway is that unless you are directly receiving like cash assistance from the federal government, it's probably not a public charge problem. And the people who are actually eligible to receive cash assistance are people who do not have to worry about public charge. So food, shelter, medical assistance for yourself or your family is not a public charge problem. The law has changed a lot over this in the last 5 years. During the last presidential administration, there was like a whole roller coaster of proposed changes and actual changes and lawsuits that had to do with public charge. But what I'm telling you is like the current actual law now. So some people might be relaying to you things they were told by lawyers a couple years ago. which might not be accurate anymore. Some people might have lawyers who are giving out outdated information because the law has changed a bunch on this issue, and especially attorneys in private practice, you know, if they're not working with public benefits experts, just might not have the most up-to-date info all of the time. But these are good, helpful resources about that.
And Jessica, there's just like an update. It says they meant in the direct application to the landlord, so not necessarily Aaron, just checking. So they're just applying for an apartment without like not under a housing program.
So the situation is a client of mine. She is a mother of two and she lives with the children's father and their family. The children's father is undocumented, and is afraid to put his name on any type of application to an apartment, to a house, or anything like that, in fear that it will affect his case due to the information his lawyer gave him.
Okay, so I would share the resources that I just mentioned, and also if they have further questions, they can call our legal advice line. I'm not a housing expert, so I don't want to give you all bad information. I know that like federal subsidized housing does have restrictions on who can and can't be included, and I am not 100% up to date on what the rules are around undocumented family members. So I would say reach out to our legal advice line and talk to our other attorneys about it.
Will do. Thank you very much.
I put the number in the chat.
There's a question in the chat, and then I see Marisol, your hand is up. So the first question is resources for in-person interpreter and translation services to help with completing documents. I don't know if anybody has suggestions or recommendations. That may be something actually, if you, I don't know if 211 actually could help find those resources. I don't actually know the answer to this. Okay.
I think it'll depend on the type of document you're referring to. If it's for immigration applications, they should be, best case scenario, best practice is to work with a legal service provider who should be helping out with interpretation and document and translation.
And do you know if it's like applying for other kinds of benefits? Like, so I'm thinking EHSD is the department that basically oversees most of the benefits programs for the county. I don't want to put anybody on the spot from EHSD, but like just wondering what your translation services are that are available through those programs. But if it's other kinds of documents, I don't know. Okay, we'll do some research. Marisol, go ahead.
I'm wondering if there are any resources for, I have a mother who's undocumented. Her children are US citizens, but they're still minors, in a sense like they can't help her financially. And I hear that there's really no housing support, but there are any resources to help out with other things financially, between CoWorks and whatever she's able to work. I honestly, I don't know how she makes the rent and the basic needs between those two incomes.
One thing I'm going to flag, and I'm going to put it in the chat again, is we have done trainings about how to connect people to benefits. And so there are some times where like the kids may be eligible. So I'm going to drop a link to that training so that you can get some of that information directly. But I don't know if there's anybody on this training that's here that could answer some of that too. So
I'll reiterate what's being said in the chat about
Great,
CalFresh and CalWork.
Great.
Yeah. Even if you are an undocumented parent, you can still receive, your household can still receive benefits on behalf of your US citizen children. Also one thing if it's okay to say now, I meant to say earlier, if people are in the process of applying for certain types of humanitarian relief, so like the U visa for victims of crime, which has a really long processing time, they are eligible for public benefits in California. So that includes CalWORKS, CalFresh, cash assistance program for immigrants, which elderly or disabled immigrants, you know, might be a really helpful safety net resource for them. It's fully funded by the state, so it doesn't pose a public charge problem. I'm thinking about the people on the call who mentioned elderly, undocumented people, which is a really tough thing. A lot of people have been in this country for a while and are aging into retirement age with no safety net, right? Because they're undocumented. It's really it's really important to like just encourage people to periodically get consultations with an immigration attorney, because, for example, my office is helping somebody right now who is in her late 70s. She's undocumented. She's applying for a U visa. She was the survivor of really horrific domestic violence years ago that got reported to the police. She never got connected to legal services until now. We're helping her apply for a U visa. Once she applies, she will qualify for these basic safety net services, even just by applying. So there might be elderly folks that y'all are working with who could really benefit from a consultation to see if they can apply for immigration relief that also might connect them to public benefits too.
Great. We have time if there are other questions that people want to ask. And if not, I encourage you to fill out the survey. I dropped it in the chat again. I really, really want to thank our speakers. There was a lot of planning that went into this and a lot of meetings. So I appreciate you speakers for your patience as we were putting this together for the first time. This was real. I thought I learned a lot. I thought this was really, really helpful. I am also going to actually go through the chat and pull out the different resources that were offered and create a separate document that I'm going to attach to the materials, because I think there was a lot of wisdom shared in the chat as well. So I want to make sure that folks have access to that. So I'm going to leave this open for a little bit longer, but I think we are officially done. So be free, but I'm just going to hang out a little bit in case people have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question if there's time. So I'm working with a family, they're a family of 9 undocumented individuals, special needs youth who's trying to get into high school. They recently changed addresses, and the new landlord is kind of a slumlord, won't provide a lease, won't provide any of the documents necessary. They had the documents at the old address when they were at the middle school, but now he's trying to get into high school. So I was trying to get, Xfinity, some kind of proof of utilities, and the school is still giving them problems with this. So I'm just wondering, would the McKinney-Vento help with this particular family, even though they're not homeless?
I'm checking to make sure. It looks like Gina dropped off and I don't see, it looks like, unfortunately, both the speakers from the school district have popped off, but I want to make sure that you have their information. So I'm going to put that in the chat because I think that would be a great question for them directly. Let me make sure I got Gina's email.
All right. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to drop this in the chat right now. That's Gina's email, and I would definitely contact her directly. Thanks for asking the question. Anybody else have other questions? Okay, I'm going to let you all be free. Thank you so much for coming. Speakers, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting and helpful. And I will also, speakers, I will get you the survey results too, so you can get some feedback.
Wait,
Thank
Jamie.
you. Yes, yes, Maureen, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question that doesn't have anything to do with this training.
Oh, okay. Let me reach out to you separately.
All right. Okay, bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.